Hello, freaky friends. Thanks for joining me today. Well, my camera does not seem to be working, so we're going to do this a little bit differently today. And hopefully it'll turn out pretty good. Maybe it'll turn out better than usual. So I'm going to begin a new vlog on my channel, which is going to kind of follow my path in me writing my second book, The Wyndigo Rising. Really, the first step of my writing process is just letting the muse talk to me, getting the puzzle pieces together, seeing what, strikes my fancy, gets my interest, and kind of points me in the right direction. Nothing really cohesive, just getting those ideas churning in my mind. And what I do with these ideas is I write them down in my notebooks. I am a office supply junkie. Notebooks, pens, staplers, anything and everything from the office supply store. It makes me very happy. So any excuse to buy a notebook is good for me. That being said, the first step of my process, the gathering part of my process, I have a blue notebook, little one that I can fit into my purse, my back pocket, anywhere and everywhere for whenever an idea strikes me, whether it's about the plot, a new character, motivation, anything and everything, or even a place that really stands out in my mind. I even keep it by my bed at night. I'll wake up, have an idea, and I'll write it down, and then I can go back to sleep because I got shit to do in the morning. My second notebook is a little bit bigger. It's where I take the opportunity to kind of track my ideas, see if they're actually going anywhere. Just let my mind wander, make charts, do my research, whatever it is, just throw it in my notebook. I don't really organize it at this point. It's just whatever comes to me. And what I'm doing is I'm following my ideas down the path to see if it leads me to a dead end or something more interesting down the line. It's usually the ideas from my little blue book that kind of get bigger and broader in my designated book notebook. Now this time around with book 2, The Wyndigo Rising, I've decided to really delve into the villain aspect. My first book was more about the main character Lydia and her journey and enlightenment and her struggle. And I did have a villain, and it was filled out, but it was a lot more of me leaving clues, ideas, for the villain to develop over my series as I develop my main character, Lydia, through the series. So I'm hoping to develop them together. And I also don't have just one villain in my series idea. So I've sat around, talked to people that are gamers, readers, moviegoers, writers. I wanted to know what makes a good villain, a bad villain, and anything in between, or something that you haven't heard before, or what cliches to avoid. And that's all in my villain notebook. Past that is when I start sketching out my characters, sketching out places and scenes, items that are going to be in my book. And that kind of helps shut off one side of my brain and turn on the other. And I get fresh ideas, new ways to go. And it's great for writer's block also. Now this character is Delphine. She was a small character in my first book. And I decided to sketch out all my characters just to get a working idea of what I want them to look like, what kind of attitude they start to develop. Later on, this will develop into something a little bit more detailed. Now, my second step to my process, and this is where I am right now, is kind of my macro-micro view of my story and my plot. It's where I organize my ideas and decide which path I've decided to go. So one of my best friends on the second step of me writing is the whiteboard. This is where I can break down kind of the macro, the big picture kind of view of my book and where it's going, and its weak points and its strengths. So I have 3 acts. I have Ren, Lydia, and Wyndigo, and each one represents different sections of the book, the first, middle, and end. This is where I write down any big scenes, some interactions, some key meetings on each act of the book. And then I'll usually draw arrows to where I want to interweave foreshadowing, clues, information. So I'm able to really visualize what I want to do and how I'm weaving the tapestry of the novel together. Now, it also shows me the weaknesses. When I did this originally with my whiteboard, I definitely saw that my second act was very weak. And for a horror novel, it didn't really have much horror going on. And I don't want a shitty book. So I definitely had to take a look at that and see what happened. And what looked to have happened was that I got caught up in the politics and the drama and kind of the backstory of my novel, also kind of getting lost in some of the subplots and not having my main plot really shine at this time, and that's where it should be really picking up. But I also saw that my first act, which I've titled Wren, which is a new character I'm introducing, was really overshadowing my second act and my third act. And I was drawing out a lot of details that didn't need to be drawn out. So I definitely saw that it was heavier and bogging down my book. And in looking at this, I understood that I needed to condense my ideas and condense my scenes in the first act because it was really outweighing and kind of slowing down my book a little bit in a different kind of way. It was just too much information all at once. And my second act didn't have a backbone, so I really needed to kind of lengthen it. I needed to move some of the facts in the first chapter into the second chapter, and I needed to bring a little more horror and scare into that part of the book. I could also see that my third act was doing pretty okay, and it was shaping up quite nicely. I also leave my third act a little open to interpretation because I don't know where the characters and the story is really going to take me. I do have some specific points where I want my final climax to happen, but I don't really lock myself in. I give myself enough wiggle room to be able to develop the story naturally. So the whiteboard really helps me interweave the subplots, the clues, the foreshadowings, and the links to the different chapters and even to my first book, The Lesser Devil. So I move on to part B of step 2, which is where I begin my chapter blocking. Kind of helps me with the micro look at my story and my plot and where I'm going. So I create a Word file or whatever file you want to call it, and I name it for the conflict of that chapter, basically the purpose of that chapter. As you see in my example, I have a woman with 6 toes. Well, that is her conflict, her dealing with those 6 toes. And you see the story progress with ever more increasing conflicts. And I'm able to see where I'm going and how I'm going to get there. Now, I may not fill out that file. I may go in and give like 1, 2, maybe 3 sentences of detail and ideas for that conflict. Or I may go in and go ahead and write the entire chapter if I have the ideas for it. But I don't force myself to work linearly. I do have a linear path that I can see, but if I'm having writer's block on, say, John confronting her about cheating on her, but I have a great idea for when she is about to cut off his thing, then I can go ahead and write that and not force it with the other chapters, because you can really see that in your writing. I tend to work in layers like this. And as you're working on the chapter that's really talking to you, you're really getting that chapter nailed down. You can also see some foreshadowing that you can do in the chapters before, or clues. And as you go back and you get inspiration for the earlier chapters, you can fill those in. And that's how I do it. I usually fill in those chapters in a rough outline, which I call my chapter blocking kind of my outline. And then I go in and slowly fill them out. So I would see my whiteboard as kind of, the structure, and then my chapter blocking as my bones. And I start adding the flesh bit by bit to my story. And I have a structure to build on. During the second step and the beginning of step 3 is when I begin to work on my God box. My God box is where I keep all my character sheets for people, places, and items. They're kind of built off the idea of like D&D character sheets. I might be showing my geek here. I'll make a character sheet per character, one at the beginning of my book and one at the end of my book. Because hopefully your character has developed over your entire book. And since my book is a horror novel, they might have a few scars, wounds, limps, that kind of thing by the end of the book. And I definitely don't want to forget about those with my second book. And this also makes it easier for me to remember how I described them in the first book. I'll be writing about a character and be like, damn, what color did I say his eyes were? And this also gives him more depth. You may not put it in your book, but I think a backstory for each character is very important. You don't want a flat character. Every little character in my book has a character sheet with every little detail. I'm very specific on only allowing so many strengths and so many weaknesses. And each character has to have both. And I don't want to forget them as I move on in the series. And I also want to develop them. I also have item sheets where I will describe an item and what attributes that item will have. And I make a physical picture of it. And with these files, I will download pictures of people on the internet that I find have the closest look to the characters I'm trying to create. And it's definitely helpful for when you're moving on with your next book and your next idea. And it keeps your characters constant. I'll also write a sheet on what they usually wear, what they usually have on them, any special items, because I really have a thing against pulling a rabbit out of your ass, trying to save your characters. It is definitely a pet peeve of mine. My character sheets keep me honest, consistent, and on track. As I'm approaching step 3, which is where I really start focusing and buckling down and filling out my chapter blocking, you'll end up with a very rough draft. My rough draft tends to be very thin. My original rough draft for my book was less than 100 pages, and I ended up just filling it out with details and points of view, and I tend to work that way where sometimes others find that very frustrating and time-consuming. That's the only way that I can get my brain to wrap around the puzzle that I'm trying to build. I recommend Stephen King's book on writing, and I also recommend Book in a Month. Both are overall excellent books. Stephen King's book on writing is an overall exploration of the craft of writing and the nuances of the process. Also some excellent storytelling. Book in a Month will help you organize your thoughts and get you to think about the right questions to ask, and helps you focus your ideas and keeps you on track. I welcome you to join me on my journey as I write the Wyndigo Rising, and as you write your book. I'll be posting videos every other Monday. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Till next time, live, write, bleed.